Sorry, could I ask you to sit on the other side?
So good evening everyone, welcome to this evening's meeting, the Association for Cypriot, Greek and Turkish Affairs. My name is Dimitris Rousounis, I'm the chairman. I send the apologies of our president, Zenon Stavrinidis, who unfortunately is unable to come this evening. Yes, so this evening's meeting with British High Commissioner to Nicosia, Matthew Kidd. Britain and Cyprus changes afoot. Mr. Kidd took up his post at the High Commission in May 2010. He began his career at the FCO in 1978 and took up his first posting in Cyprus in 1980. He was later posted to New York, Paris, Ethiopia, Germany and NATO before returning again to Cyprus. A few words about this evening before we carry on with the lecture. As you well know, it's the 6th Keith Kyle lecture on British and Cypriot relations. Mr. Kyle was one of our first members. I remember meeting him in the very early 90s, at one of the very early meetings. And he continued coming to our meetings until, if I'm not mistaken, December 2006 was the very last meeting he came to, and passed away a couple of months later. Whenever he used to come into our meetings, we all used to cheer up, mainly because we knew we'd get some good questions at the end of the evening, which isn't always the case. Secondly, he was very kind to any of the younger members, especially any academics who were doing PhDs or masters. He'd always have time for them. Quite a few of our members went and visited him and had not tuition, but were able to ask questions pertinent to their research and such. And so we're glad that we're able once again to welcome somebody of Mr. Kidd standing to give the lecture. I think we'll start. We've given 5 or 6 minutes to some of the late comers.
Over to me. Well, I should start by saying how proud I feel to have been asked to give this lecture, and to feel that and to know that Keith Kyle's widow is here with us tonight. I will do my best not to disappoint his memory. I'm afraid to say that I have reached the stage of my life when I can either look at my notes or I can look at you without my glasses, and I would rather look at you without my glasses than have to look at my notes. So I won't read a text. I will try to make it up as I go along. If that fails, I do have some notes, but then I will have to look down and I will be disappointed if it comes to that. As you've been told, I have had an intermittent experience of Cyprus now, lasting over 30 years, and my posting in Cyprus, this posting in Cyprus, will come to an end in 2 or 3 months' time. So it's an opportunity for me to indulge myself in looking back a bit and considering change, not just over the last 2 or 3 years, but also with a perspective going back a bit further than that. What I thought I would try to do is to try to justify the title that I suggested by listing some of the factors that seem to me to suggest that indeed there is change afoot in the relationship between Britain and the island. Not just in terms of political things that have been happening recently, but more in terms of some of the underlying smaller changes of atmosphere, changes of climate, which I think probably help to make the political developments potentially all the more significant. Having done that, having dropped a few pieces of jigsaw in front of you, if you like, I thought I'd try and answer the question, what has caused the change of atmosphere? What is it that has made that change possible? And I've a number of reasons to offer, not all presented as kind of hard fact, but as speculations, as things that may be contributing to the change of climate. And then to try to end with a sense of what it can mean, what we can do with it, what can be the result of this change of atmosphere, if indeed it is as I suggested. So that's what to expect, and I'll now try and deliver on it. I hoped that I would be able to bring with me and wave at you at this point a physical proof of one thing that I think is changing. We had a plan with the Office of the Under-Secretary of the President to be organising next week in the Palace a joint British High Commission Presidential Office seminar. We would have had invitations which would have had both logos on them, and we would have had British speakers and Cypriot speakers, and I hope we would have been able to have a good discussion of some of the public sector reform and broader reform issues that the government is trying to tackle at the moment. Unfortunately, we've had to put the event off for a couple of weeks, so the invitations haven't yet been printed. But I do think that that invitation card with two logos on it, inviting people to a jointly organised event on a topic as potentially central as that, would have marked, and will mark, I hope, in the next few weeks when it happens, something really quite different about the nature of collaboration between us, which is part of what I think the change afoot is about. I could have brought my second little piece of evidence to wave at you, which would have been a tiny cutting from the Financial Times of one day, I think last week, talking about the effect of Ukraine-related sanctions. There was one line in a paragraph of its own which said, Britain and Cyprus have concerns related to financial services. And it went on to talk about something else. And I thought to myself again, here is an encapsulation of something which affects the two countries as part of the broader EU family in a parallel way, and is able to be reflected in that sort of way with, I think, the underlying assumption that in the discussions in Brussels of the sanctions measures as they're developed, we would find ourselves, the two countries, arguing the same sort of cases in terms of how they should apply to financial services. A third piece of jigsaw of the same kind, we arranged for the new financial ombudsman being set up in Cyprus to come as he prepared to do the job, before even he had the legislation in place to enable him to start work, to come and spend a week shadowing, if you like, the financial ombudsman here in London, to see how in the British system that job is done, so that as the similar function gets into operation in Cyprus, he would start it with that model to provide a basis for developing his own method of operation. Again, it's not a big thing, it's not a controversial thing, but it is another demonstration of an instinct for sharing best practice for engaging with each other in the whole area of how the machinery of government works, which is something quite new, and which, perhaps better still, seems to happen, now that we've started it, remarkably easily. So easily indeed that when the government started to look at who was going to help do the public sector reform work that is included in the Memorandum of Understanding with the Troika from about a year ago now, they were keen that the UK should be involved in that work. They convinced the Troika that it made sense to involve us, even though we're, as you know, not part of the Eurozone, not part of that grouping, to let us be part of it, as well as the World Bank, because, they said, the basis of the public administration as it has developed in Cyprus started with UK models, started with UK experience under colonial times, and so we would know well how to map changes that need to be made, reforms that need to be made, onto the Cypriot model which we had helped to develop in the first place. And that thinking has reached the point even where in the second wave of reform reviews, which is starting this summer, including the Foreign Ministry and the Defence Ministry, the Cyprus government is still ready to let the United Kingdom or British reviewers do the review of those two highly political, highly sensitive ministries. And just think about how different an assumption about the extent to which our experts, not governmental experts, but still British experts, can be trusted to come into those two ministries, be told how they work, and offer advice on how they can do their work as well as possible. I think that's something quite important. And last jigsaw point of this kind, I think that the first breach that we made in the wall, if you like, was in preparation for Cyprus's EU presidency 2 years ago, when we, along with other member states, offered secondees to come and work in the Cypriot system to help it run the extra challenges of the presidency. We were unusually able to offer exactly the help that they needed, because we could draw on some of the UK-based British-born Cypriots who were working already in the British civil service, had the Greek, had the family links in Cyprus as well. We ended up with, I think, 6 of them overall. The first one, the Council of Ministers needed to approve the appointment because it was the first time that the Cypriot governmental machine had taken in a foreigner in that kind of way. But I believe, and the feedback that we got suggested, that the people we sent fitted in so well, fitted in so comfortably, convinced the machine that they were temporarily part of that they could be trusted, that they could be relied on to operate, as it were, as temporary Cypriots, that it helped build the confidence for the other things that have happened since. The big political events that have happened in the last period, for instance, the President Anastasiadis' visit back in January, the arrangement on non-military development that we signed at that point, those are, obviously, they help to change atmospheres as well. They help to mark developments of relationships as well. But I think that the effect that those big political things can have is all the greater if the underlying climate, the underlying spirit, has already reached a point where it is a natural thing to have that sort of discussion between the Prime Minister and the President, rather than doing it, as it were, from scratch. A couple of points about the visit. Three things that struck me about it, which I think are also relevant. First of all was the breadth of topics that the two sides discussed during the meetings during that week. It wasn't a single strand visit by any means. It was a visit which enabled the two leaders to discuss not only bilateral issues, not only the Cyprus problem, but also a range of EU issues, a range of current European security issues, energy issues, legal issues. That all seemed to me to reflect a relationship that went quite a long way beyond what it used to be like. I think also every visit of that kind here by a Cypriot leader offers reminders also of the strength of the Cypriot community here as part of the overall tapestry of the relationship. And every visitor of that kind, High Commission knows it better than I do, has meetings with the community, does things with the community, is supported by the closeness of the community here, and that was true in this case as well. The other thing that struck me was how it seemed to be the case for the President that he thought that visiting London in the way that he did, with the profile of the visit, would be to his domestic political advantage back home. It would suit him well to show that he was getting on well with the British government. I'm not sure that that's always been the case in the past, but that it was so this time was significant and I think positive. I don't want to sort of belabor the point about the relationship between the big events and the underlying atmospheric things that go ahead, but I think in the best of cases they provide a sort of a virtuous circle. The jigsaw bits gradually get better and better, then with luck you get a big event which crystallises where you got to and creates the basis on which further jigsaw things can happen in the months to follow. And I think we're in that stage now with things happening since the visit, like the further stages of the public sector reform, as I said. So I feel, as a result of all that I have seen during my time in Cyprus this time, that relationship has built up quite a long way. But I should say that it's not the only Cypriot relationship that I think has been built up during the same period. It's different, the relationship with the Turkish Cypriot authorities, obviously, but I think in the same way we have been able to show them that there is scope to do practical things with them too, within all the constraints that apply and need to apply, which can help us be a more reliable, a more extensive partner for both communities, which means in turn that if we get it right, we can have a greater degree of trust with and from both communities in parallel, which means that in terms of the big central task of supporting the search for a settlement, we can be influential with both in parallel, not appearing to put more effort into maintaining and developing one relationship at the risk of losing the ability to have influence also on the other. So that balance is there. It's not a new thing. I hope that we have managed to develop the the relationship with the Republic in the ways that I've described, while not undermining the contacts that we also have with the Turkish Cypriots, and therefore the influence that we can have with them. So what do I think the reasons for it all are? I'll give you in sort of headline form a set of things which I think may be contributing. I won't try to define definitely whether they all are. You will have views on it as well. I think one easy factor is the passage of generations, the passage of time. I've been very struck, tiny example of this, by, some of you will know the details more than I do, over the last 2 or 3 years there has been a release in several tranches of a new archive of colonial material, including some relating to Cyprus, going back to, I think, as far back as the 1890s, 1900s. It's not very novel. Most of the stuff in it, as far as I can see, does no more than just complete a picture which has already been pretty extensively reflected in previous releases from the PRO to the Public Record Office. But I've been struck by how uncontroversial the releases have been, uncontroversial the material that's come out has been. And I draw from that, I hope correctly, a sense that some of the sensitivities, some of the controversies that those papers reflect from particularly perhaps the 40s and 50s are no longer quite as acutely sensitive as they used to be. They're starting to move back into history, if you like, as opposed to current affairs. I was struck also, slightly different point, but I think it's also relevant. The other day I was talking to a historian in Cyprus who argued to me a theory which I was taken by surprise by, that of all the players, the outside players in 1974, the one which played a role most helpful, or maybe least unhelpful, no, I think even most helpful, he said, to the Republic was the UK. And that's quite surprising, coming from a Greek Cypriot historian, but again, maybe it reflects a gradual ability to start seeing some of the traditional assumptions, deeply held assumptions, in a slightly fresher light. I'm not saying that it's true, I'm not saying that it was false, but the fact that there is a serious historian currently at work on the island who is seeing things in that light and about, I hope, to publish a book on those lines is a new development and quite an interesting, I think, suggestion that there is a passage of time factor going on. Another element which is quite clearly there is the effect of EU membership. Cyprus and the UK are getting increasingly used to being partners around that big table in Brussels, dealing with a huge variety of issues, some of them controversial, some of them not controversial at all, some of them areas where the United Kingdom has big things to ask and looks to Cyprus as one of the other countries which is likely to be sympathetic and maybe persuaded to speak up to support us, sometimes the other way around, sometimes we're not always on the same wavelength, but the fact of getting used over the years to discussing together in that bigger group such a big range of business is, I think, in itself having an influence bit by bit on the nature of the way that we look at each other. There has been, no doubt about it, particularly over the last 5-6 years, a deliberate bilateral effort from both sides to find areas, including non-political areas, where there is a natural, practical reason to collaborate, to do so. And that effort started back in 2009 when the previous president came here and signed with Gordon Brown, then the Prime Minister, a memorandum of understanding of all the various issues that we were going to try to work on together. And they were a pretty odd bunch, in a sense, ranging from educational research to football hooliganism to road safety. And there were reasons, that's to say, not very political reasons, why it looked as though collaboration on all those areas made practical sense. And so those areas have mostly, not all, but mostly been taken forward in a bilateral kind of way in the years since. Different sorts of things have been done. But that sort of effort to identify kinds of business where it makes sense to look at each other as potential partners and get into the habit of practical collaboration is, again, I think it's helping to develop a different sort of understanding, which I hope can only be useful. I think there's a new element which came in over the time that I've been there, as the economic crisis in Greece became acute in 2010-11, and before it became acute in Cyprus as well. It became quite a normal thing to hear Cypriots say, one of the things that makes Cyprus different from Greece in terms of our economic situation is that we at least had the benefit of the British colonial administration in helping us set up our budgetary management processes in the first place. We, because of that, I used to be told, are in a better situation than Greece is. And I think it's true, even since the crisis, that the ability of the Cypriot economic government machine to grapple with the demands of the Troika, to get the things done that the Troika says need to be done, and to start already to be doing better than the Troika estimated a year ago would be the case. I like to think, and I think that a lot of Cypriots think, that that colonial heritage in that area has a little bit to do with that. The crisis itself, I think, in addition to all its other impacts, has prompted a kind of, maybe it sounds a bit too dramatic to say so, but a sort of crisis of values, if you like. It has prompted a lot of Cypriots to want to think again about some of the assumptions that they have lived with about how their country is run, about the way that the political system operates, about the ways in which public money has been spent, about the effect on social and economic development of the unsolved Cyprus problem, in ways which I think are starting to have an effect in terms of public attitudes to the value, the need, the urgency of the search for a settlement. And the opinion poll results over the last 3-6 months, when people have been asked about their attitude to the government's efforts to search for a settlement. The very high support for that effort seems to me to be a reflection, among other things, of that sort of new thinking, fresh thinking about how important it is to try to find a settlement. I think there are developments related to our side of the picture as well, which have perhaps helped to make the change possible. I think that we have, over the years since 2004, absorbed, digested some lessons about how outsiders like us can and should not try to help support that search for a settlement. So I hope that if we have become a bit more sensitive to some of the things that didn't work out right in 2004, then that too is helping to create a more positive dynamic involving us. The discovery of gas reserves is another factor. I think that is still something which people are coming to terms with, but it clearly is something which is potentially big enough for not just Cyprus but for the whole region, again to require some new thinking about the things which it may make possible and the things which need to be in place in order for the reserves to be exploited. And that too is a factor. And I think because British companies have not been winners of any of the blocks, are not doing any of the development, are not doing any of the exploring for gas, I get the sense that it gives us a little bit of detachment, a little bit of credibility as being detached from some of the commercial factors which may motivate others. Yes, we're involved in all sorts of other parts of it, in the legal bits, the financing bits, the security bits, the maintenance bits, but because we're not in that headline business of exploration, maybe that enables us to be seen as a partner of a different kind in that sort of way. So overall, combination, you can take your pick how many of those you buy, how many of those you recognise. Some of them are, if you like, external factors, external changes of climate. Some of them are the result of deliberate policy choices by one player or another, or all of them together. But clearly, if there is a change afoot, it is the result of more than just government action. There are many more things going on involving Cypriots, but also involving others in the region. Finally, what can we do with it? I will tell you what I hope we can do with it. I will share with you I share with you my vision for what my successor can do when he gets to Cyprus in the summer and afterwards. I think there are three huge challenges in Cyprus and its region, which the change in the relationship, the profile of Britain in Cyprus can help to make happen, and can help Britain to help make happen. The first of them, obviously, is the intercommunal problem. I've been telling people for some months now that my feeling is that the prospects for progress, and potentially even quite rapid progress, are better now than at any time since I've been there, since 2010, and better also than at any time when I was there in the 80s. And there are a number of reasons why, relating to public attitudes, as I've been saying, relating to the attitudes of the parties and of some of the players immediately around, relating to the impact of the economic crisis and to the discovery of energy, but relating also to that scope, if the UK knows how to use it well, for us to be trusted to be a more active support player. I hope I put it with the right sort of level of ambition. We're not going to solve it. Nobody would allow us to solve it, quite rightly not. But I think we do have, and we try our best to have, a level of engagement and trust and understanding with all the players who need to be involved to enable us to be part of the facilitation of the creation of opportunities, the encouragement of people to seize the opportunities. So I hope that if there is a change in the way that people think about the UK in Cyprus, that is one of the ways in which it can be beneficial. The second, I think, is energy. I'm very, very struck by the concept, and I can't tell you who I first heard it from because I heard it at Chatham House, so you know what that means. But I'm very struck by the concept of trying to use the new fact of energy reserves in the East Mediterranean to support some sort of model of new regional collaboration like the European coal and steel community of the 1950s, when coal and steel provided a reason for France and Germany and the others to start to collaborate, settle, share, and get over differences which had not previously been easy to find. Potentially, the gas reserves are big enough in scale to provide a similar sort of incentive for lots of the players in the region, not just Cyprus and Turkey, who don't easily collaborate, but Israel and Lebanon and Egypt and Israel and Turkey, to find something that they all have in common or can all benefit from. Thinking at a very early stage, but as I say, I do believe that there is potentially something there which it would be really exciting to help make happen. And I hope that the UK, having its links, its established profile, not just with Cyprus and Turkey as parts of that, but with the other players as well, could possibly help to make that happen. And final point, more parochial if you like, I do think that the level of trust that I've described gives us a better opportunity for trying to achieve a new sort of understanding with the Cypriots of how the bases, the British bases on the island, serve not just UK national interests, but a broader European security interest, of which Cyprus, as now a member of the EU Common Security and Defence Policy, is a shareholder too. That is a very new kind of conversation, and I think we will probably find it quite difficult to get into having it, but I do think there is an opportunity there which, again, if we can get that right, and it will involve talking to others as well, can enable the bases too to become a factor for stability in the region in a way that has not been possible before. Not that they haven't been, but not in that way up to now. So if we can do, or rather, if my successor can arrange for all those three things to happen during his time in office, then he will have been lucky enough to achieve three things that I would like to have achieved, but I hope at least I have helped to create the conditions in which that sort of ambitious thinking is feasible, is realistic. And I hope that you will agree that at least some of what I've said about change rings, and that you will agree that those objectives are ones worth pursuing. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for a most interesting, wide-ranging and positive speech, which is always good.
Which is always positive.
No, not that your speech was positive, but a lot of the speeches we have aren't as positive. We're going to open up the floor. Would you rather take one question at a time, or would you like to take a couple?
See how difficult they are.
Can I ask that you state your names before you ask a question, and that it is a question and not necessarily a statement, and that if you don't wish to be filmed asking a question, that you mention that before you ask the question. James.
Thank you very much. James Collins, London School of Economics. Hi, Commissioner. Certainly, it was incredible to listen to what you were saying this evening. I mean, the transformation in relations between Britain and Cyprus, it has been incredible. I certainly, in all the years that I've been looking at Cyprus, have never seen such a positive relationship. So all credit to you and obviously to the Cyprus government. Two particular questions that come out of all of this. And the first touches on your final point, which was on security. We have seen, obviously, in recent months, a greater sense within the European Union of cohesion amongst European partners in security, particularly in NATO. And I get a real distinct impression there is going to be a push for enlargement of NATO to bring in those countries in Southeast Europe that aren't NATO members, that want to be NATO members, into the fold. And that brings us to the question of Cyprus. As you're aware, President Nicosia has initiated a discussion on this, is talking about partnership for peace. What sort of role can Britain play in facilitating a closer relationship between Cyprus and NATO at this stage? And does it really want to take that lead role? The second question is on the European Union. As you may have seen a few days ago, the latest Eurobarometer was published. Cyprus actually has lower levels of support for the European Union than Britain, believe it or not. And it's quite clear that the UK is looking for allies in any discussion about some sort of change to Britain's relationship with the European Union. I know, for example, that Croatia, which is also very Eurosceptic these days, has been identified as a very close partner in this. Do you see Cyprus now becoming an ally in that capacity, and that it will support Britain in whatever attempts to renegotiate its relationship with the EU that it's going to attempt to embark on in the next few months and years? Thank you.
But I'm supposed to have something for to start with the back, I mean, I slightly challenge the implicit logic that what we're looking for is Eurosceptics to be our partners. I mean that goes into a discussion about our attitude to the EU, which is maybe not what we're here for tonight. I mean, I think it is true that we have found in discussing with the Cypriots that quite a lot of the areas where we think reform is needed chime with them too. When we talk to them, for instance, about the need for the EU to become more competitive, to do better at the way that it does its regulations, to worry about democratic legitimacy at a slightly more operational level, to sort out some of the remaining dilemmas about financial governance, we find that they engage very actively with some of these things. I hope that they will indeed be part of the discussion, which we hope to have, particularly once the new Parliament, the new Commissioner, are in place later in the year, about what the priorities, what the challenges for the next 5 years ought to be. But that's not because we think that Cyprus is Eurosceptic or Croatia is Eurosceptic, or because we read the Eurobarometer polls and say, we're going to talk to them because they're on the same wavelength as us. It's because actually the kinds of concern that we have, the kinds of thing that we think need to be dealt with in the EU are things that they see in similar ways. You'll tell me if I'm saying the wrong things, won't you? As far as NATO is concerned, I think it stands out, if you like, that Cyprus is the only country in Europe that has no relationship with NATO at all, and that's a pity. and it's a pity all the more because of its geographical position. We all know why that is, and the question, I think, is how to handle this government's positive attitude towards PFP, and who knows, maybe beyond, in a way that does not run off the rails in the obvious way. So I think it does make sense for them, as they have been doing, having advertised their interest, to take it gently, to give the idea time to ripen. But the potential benefit of filling that hole in NATO's European portfolio, if you want to put it like that, I think is very clear. Whether we're going to get to the stage of rushing to offer NATO membership to Southeast Europeans before they've gone through the whole normal NATO membership process, I don't know, but that's another issue.
Yeah, gentleman over there.
Sir, my question is this, very simple. I hope it will not take a long time. Now, don't you think that Europe, including Britain, including America, they have stereotype attitude towards Cyprus problem? Turkey has been trying to join Europe since 1960 and still not member of Europe. Secondly, why? Second question, which is again Cyprus, of course. How it comes? Now, yes. Now, the Europe said to the Turkey, before you come to us, access to Europe, you have to solve your problem with the Greece. Now, before the Greece became a member of the Europe, we had already problem with the Greece. And still, they allow the Greece to access to Europe. So I don't think that is a stereotype attitude of Europe. Secondly, Cyprus, at the present time, there is two governments, two nations on that island, TRNC and South Cyprus. If this island is divided into two, how can they allow the Cyprus to be the member of the NATO? Because it is not a unity anymore. There is two countries, two governments, two sovereign states. So therefore, which I'm going to end up, I consider this stereotype attitude in both cases against the Turkish community on that island. It's not enough, this. They told us, if we say yes in 2004, in May, 24th of May, in referendum, if you say yes, we will allow you to join the EU and we will lift the embargo. Turks, 70% of the Turkish Cypriot said yes, Greeks said no. How can you say that there is a democracy and human rights in this universe? Is that because we are a Turkish and Muslim? Give me the answer, please. Thank you.
The answer to your last question is no, that's not why. It's not because you're Muslim. It's not because you're Turkish Cypriots. The answer to that last question is because the deal was that both referenda in parallel needed to come to a yes vote, and only one did. That's why.
Why did they keep the promise? Although
Let me answer my question. I was going to start step by step. I think it's not surprising that the process of Turkey's accession, Turkey's process towards EU accession is slow. EU accession is a demanding process. Nobody gets through it quickly. The more adjustment that you need to make before you can, as it were, tick all the boxes, the longer it takes. There are, of course, in Turkey's case, some extra complications relating to the anxiety that some member states, not including the UK, have about Turkish membership, which have probably slowed it down further. But with the best will in the world, even if there were no EU member states who were in two minds about the eventual good sense of having Turkey as a member, it would take a long time. Turkey has a lot to do in order to be ready for membership, just as everybody else has a lot to do.
What about Bulgaria?
They took a long time
Romania?
too. They took a long time too.
Not as much as Turkey.
No, indeed. But they took a long time. And they are still, even as members, they are still under special supervisory processes from the Commission because of the range of things that they still need to do. So I don't think there's any political judgment, political conclusion to be drawn about attitudes to Turkey because the process is slow. That happens to everybody. As far as your comments about the number of authorities in the island, I would make one different comment. In today's world, being a small state leaves you very vulnerable. Being a state of 1 million people leaves you already very, very vulnerable. Economies are getting bigger, are grouping together, are trying to protect themselves by joining together because they can see that the world outside is moving in globalization, which in ways which make anybody left outside who is small very vulnerable. The idea that it would make sense to have two states, two separate states, on an island as small as Cyprus is, for that reason alone, not an attractive one. It's not a good basis for regional prosperity or stability, or for the stability and prosperity of the inhabitants of the island itself.
Well, I want to elaborate, but because
Can we have some more questions first? If we've got time, we'll come back to you. The lady just there.
Yes. The lady.
Me? Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
and
sorry.
then
I didn't want to take his turn.
Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Aysen Yilmaz. I am the president of the Council of Turkish Cypriot Associations in the UK. As you quite rightly said, there are a lot of Cypriots living in England because over the years, of course, it's been a long time since this dispute hasn't been sorted out or settled for one reason or another. And I do believe the British government have failed us greatly on that island because in 1960, when this agreement was signed, the treaty was signed, things did go drastically wrong, and maybe at the time it could have been put right and so many lives would not have been lost, because as far as I'm concerned, a life is a life. It doesn't matter who you are, what you are, and I don't think anybody should lose their lives in war. My question is I think the British government has built a very strong relationship with the Greek Cypriots, and there is a lot of trust there, and that was identified when the last leader of the Greek Cypriots actually visited London and signed an agreement on the British basis, which showed that the Turkish Cypriots had absolutely no idea that that was even, they weren't even consulted on that. So that to me is not a good indication to, I think Britain needs to really show how we are going to be able to be seen as being treated equally and to build that trust, because trust is so important. We can't go back to the war days as we did before. Nobody should. And no matter what everybody's views are on 74, we've all got our own views, nobody has died since 74. There has been peace on both sides. So that's one positive way of looking at it. We've all suffered one way or another, but how is the British government going to build that trust with the Turkish Cypriots? Because it is so important. If you don't give Turkish Cypriots the voice, we don't seem to have much voice we don't have a voice in EU. We don't have a voice in a lot of the meetings that carry on in the south. And I think by doing that, it's very wrong. If that is already beginning to change, I don't know. So my question is, how and when is it we're going to see some kind of proof that we are being treated the same, we have got a voice, and we are going to be trusted? We can trust the Greeks and the British and everybody else. I think we need to have a different attitude if we are going to move on. We now have third generation, fourth generation in this country. And it's about time that the younger generations are really given this opportunity to go and live in their homeland safely. The whole point of the Cyprus issue is security. And you have to have trust. Without trust, you can't, I don't believe. So I'm sorry if it's been a very long question, but that is how I would like to portray it. I think a lot of Turkish Cypriots in this country especially feel the same, that we've not been able to go back before 74 because it wasn't safe for us. So that is, I think, an important issue, and you did raise it in your talk. So I don't know how you've started already to...
And I agree with you absolutely that the fundamental basis of any solution is going to be trust between the communities who will have to live it. Otherwise, there's no point in starting. And there are different ways that you can do that at different sorts of level. You can do that in terms of steps taken by a government level. You can do it in terms of steps taken at municipal level, at community level. You can do it also, and I think it's something else that's helped make a difference in the last 2 or 3 years. You can do it by contacts between the religious leaders, and I think that is something which has been happening for the first time in the last 2 or 3 years. From a starting point of some scepticism, and I can see it on your face as well, but I think it is starting to show that efforts to develop trust can make a difference. I was very struck, I was very moved at that service on Good Friday in one of the churches in the walled city of Famagusta. The Mufti was there as well. And he was treated there as a respected part of the overall event. It certainly looked like that. I hope he felt like that as well. But I think the symbolism of the event was indeed one of commitment to try to develop trust. All the actors that I've mentioned so far, if you like, have been Cypriot actors, municipalities, churches, and so on. There is a role, yes, also for outsiders like us to find ways of building, developing contact and trust between the two communities. And we've done some of that. There's always more that you can do. The real challenge, I think, is to extend that kind of activity beyond those whose minds are already open to it, to try also to reach some of those who aren't so immediately favourable, and to try to make some of them think that maybe there's value in contact, and then eventually, with luck, in developing trust with the other community as well. That's the challenge. And I think some of the things which are now starting to happen can make a difference. I think action at governmental level can make a difference too. There are specific things that can be done that I think can have a quite remarkable dynamism building effect too. But it's a job for lots of people. It's not something which any one level or any one kind of person can do. And sure, in terms of the specific challenge to build trust in a British role, as you describe it, that's something that we have to work particularly hard at. I hope that some of the things that we're doing are helping in that direction. I can't guarantee it, but I hope they are. And I think certainly some of the feedback that we get from both sides suggests that we are having some kind of impact. There is some sort of satisfaction with some of the things that we're doing, and we'll try to carry on doing them.
Hadjigeorgiou, Cypriot journalist. How true, sir, you have been on this question of relationship between a close relationship between the United Kingdom and Cyprus, and the close cooperation, especially the last year or so, on various fields because of the economic crisis. This past year, part of it goes without saying really that part of the credit for that goes to your good self, to the role that your good self has played. And you should be congratulated on that. And yet, there is no the same analogy on the role that the United Kingdom plays with regard to the political question. And one can see it more clearly, convincingly, one could say, these days, with the interest around the effort for the solution of the problem. For various reasons, one cannot see the same role that the United States, for instance, are playing with that of the United Kingdom. Although we should remind ourselves the United Kingdom is one of the three guarantors of the independence of Cyprus. I could not imagine, for instance, William Kent going to Cyprus, even as a symbolic gesture. Yes, you use the term, I think, convincing effort regarding the role that the United Kingdom is playing, and we have no doubt that the United Kingdom is playing some role. But could one expect, as a result of this cooperation and the other obligations, and the guarantee on behalf of the United Kingdom to play a more active, especially these days, a more active and effective role?
I hope that...
Can I have a semi-personal question as well? What is the most important single point that you have learned regarding the Cyprus question out of this long service in Cyprus, different periods? Thank you.
I hope that if William Hague has been to Cyprus in my time, though it was specifically in the context of the Cypriot presidency. He came for the informal meeting of foreign ministers there. But I hope that if he comes again, he won't just come for symbolic purposes, to use your word. I hope that he would come very specifically with practical objectives to try to achieve. I don't think that it makes sense to look at the role that we play, or the Americans play, or anybody else plays at any given moment and say, why is X doing more than Y? I mean, in practice, the efforts that the Americans are currently making, including their involvement in the final stages of the joint declaration back in January, February, are absolutely the same kind of things that we would have wanted to make. They are, if you like, running with the ball at the moment, but it's not a competition. It's not as though what they're doing is therefore damaging us or leaving us out of the picture. We're part of it too, and another time, if William Hague comes, then I'm sure that they would want a visit by him to be as successful in terms of supporting the search for a settlement as we hope that next week's visit by Biden will be. It's not a conflict, and actually, I suspect it probably makes quite good sense to spread the range of people who are involved at any given moment, so that if the Americans are actively engaged over this year or this half year, whatever it is, and in 6 months' time somebody else who happens to be particularly suitable for involvement at a particular time takes up the reins, that's probably a good thing rather than a bad thing. So I wouldn't see it as a competition. I wouldn't at any rate make judgments about the level of our engagement just in terms of who's got the big names visiting the island at any given moment. Now, your second question.
Can I jump in there?
Yes, do.
He stole my thunder slightly because I was going to ask a similar question. I mean, I suppose Guillaume's point is also that the Cypriots are seeing the German Chancellor turn up, seeing supposedly Hollande is going to come in the summer, Biden, possibly Kerry in a couple of months. Is there not a time when was I was trying to think when the last time a Prime Minister actually had an official visit to Nicosia. I mean, is there a time, do you think, that will be possible soon?
Maybe. I don't know.
And is it something that you've tried to facilitate over the last 4 years?
I think that
Or is there something that won't allow that? Whatever it may be, it may be common sense that it would cause more problems than it would be worth, and it's better to work in the background.
Let us put it like this. The ambition that we would want to pursue with a visit by the Prime Minister would be greater, perhaps, than is the case for some of the others that you have mentioned, excluding Biden. So the more ambitious your aims, potentially the more difficult to make it happen, and certainly the more important not to go off at half-cock. Is there an absolute reason why not? No, of course there isn't. There have been visits by Prime Ministers, not recently. It would be excellent if it could happen again. But it's an ambitious thing to try to make happen. That's fine. The second question, what have I learned? What single thing have I learned most?
Cyprus. The Cyprus.
On the Cyprus problem. It was a personal question, and so I will answer it personally, and I think the answer is humility.
Sorry?
Humility.
On behalf of...
In terms of the scope for anybody to come in from outside and say, this is the right answer, that's not the way to do it. Did I?
Learn Greek and Turkish.
I have tried at various stages to learn both those languages, yes.
Then you will understand the people much better.
I try to, yes, and it makes a difference. I agree with you. It really does.
Next question at the back, the lady.
Thank you, High Commissioner, for a very interesting talk. My name is Yeşim Harris, Director of an intercommunal London-based peacebuilding organisation, ENGI. In your talk, you have mentioned 3 challenges, and one of them referred to the intercommunal problem. So my question is going to be related to that. You said that the UK would like to continue to be a support player. I wonder whether you see a role for Britain to support in terms of supporting trust-building measures. Is there a role for Britain to encourage or facilitate any dialogue between the 2 business communities in Cyprus, Greek-Cypriot community and Turkish-Cypriot community? Thank you.
I should actually have listed the 2 business communities as one of the areas where things are already happening. They have the 2 chambers of commerce and some of the other employers organisations and so on already have quite established contacts, and I think they make a big difference. If there is need to support what they're already doing for themselves, then I'm sure that we would be ready to look at that. But it doesn't start from zero. It's something that they're already doing, and my sense is that they are doing it quite ambitiously and quite openly in ways which add a new and important strand to the sort of bicommunal activity building that we've been talking about.
The back there.
My name is Akram. I'm the Vice Chair of BTCA as well as the Turkish Cypriot Organization. I'll be rather blunt. Thank you for this conference, firstly. I'll rather be blunt and come to the Turkish Cypriot's viewpoint of the situation that we're facing. The Turkish Cypriots more and more started feeling let down by Great Britain. Because of what has happened in 1963, and because Britain has been a guarantor power for both communities, Turkish Cypriots more and more are becoming vocal by saying that Britain has only looked after the interests of Greek Cypriots rather than the Turkish Cypriots. And although we've been promised some things for the 2004 referendum, we've been let down on those, and the embargoes are still continuing on Turkish Cypriots, be it direct flights, be it telephone conversations, bank transfers, whatever it is. The Turkish Cypriots are held incommunicado and being punished for something they have not done. And Britain, as a guarantor power, has got to actually address these issues for Turkish Cypriots, and they have failed us on that issue. And more Turkish Cypriots are becoming vocal, as I said. I would like to know what measures Britain is willing or foreseeing taking steps towards alleviating these troubles that Turkish Cypriots have been facing through no fault of their own. And the second point that I would like to bring out is that we must come out of the box. We've been studying Cyprus problem for the last 50 years, and all the time we've been produced with one solution, one single state on the island. Okay, it is the most profitable one for the 2 communities. We do understand that. But 50 years we've been trying that. While Turkish Cypriots are suffering, we're trying that, and we're fed up with that. One, we've got to come out of the box and look at other solutions as well. What can they be? Maybe 2 states, maybe something else different. But we've got to look at producing other solutions for the problem, not just one. One is not enough for us anymore. And lastly, you pointed out that Great Britain is actually, as a security place, Britain have got some bases there. But those bases are actually outside EU jurisdiction. And I seem not to get them connected with the security of the EU if they're outside the EU. Can you just explain that on that part as well?
Your first point, I mean, most of the problems that you identify are problems which are not in any one state's power to change, including the UK. things relating to the direct trade regulation, which was, I think, one of the things that you listed, things relating to direct flights. The UK doesn't have the power to say, we decide that it shall be so. Both of those things are in the hands of different and much larger groups of people. We're not in a position to make things happen just like that.
You are aware that actually Prime Minister has promised about the direct flights to Turkish Cypriots
I don't think...
after 2004?
I'm sorry, but the question of direct flights is something which is governed by the ICAO. We do not have the power unilaterally to make it. I stick to my point.
There's a Court of Appeal decision of the UK.
Quite so, exactly so. Your second question was... Tell me again what your second question was.
Well, I was actually really interested in what steps the UK is actually trying to take to alleviate.
Well, I think the answer is that we actually do quite a lot within the constraints which I described to develop our own contacts with the Turkish Cypriots, to do things with them, to support them, to help develop their own administrative capabilities. Actually, I don't feel that your description of us being part of isolating them is entirely fair.
So more and more Turkish Cypriots seem to be aggressive and coming up publicly.
Maybe they are, but I don't think that is entirely fair.
Next question. Mr. Dodd.
Okay, my name is Clement Dodd, formerly of the School of Oriental and African Studies, now of no fixed academic abode. But at the moment we are hoping that the Federation will actually come about. But I must say, speaking as a student of politics, federations are extremely difficult forms of government. And we know from historical examples that two-state federations are almost impossible, especially as the two peoples are somewhat antagonistic, mainly because one is big and one is small. And in such a situation, it's extremely difficult to get government going. And it's particularly difficult in the upper house to get a balance that is satisfactory to either side. So we've got to be very careful, I think, about thinking that a federation is going to solve the problem. It can easily fall apart unless the two peoples, the two bodies involved, are utterly determined to join together and positively wish to join in a federation. All sorts of difficulties can arise. So we've got to be too sanguine about the federation. I wonder whether there's any thinking about a plan B in the Foreign Office, because I was reading an article by Kudret Özesay, who is, as you know, the negotiator on the Turkish Cypriot side. And in this article in the British Journal, he was rather strangely arguing, in his view, that a better solution is a two-state solution. They doesn't like to use the word two-state, with both states being members of the European Union. Because in this way they get together to work on legislation, without, which is very common, without either one of them feeling superior to the other and trying to overcome the other or resent the other. And this he would see, I think, though he didn't say so, as not a division permanently between two states, but as a way in which, working together, these people from both sides over a number of years would come so close together that they would actually form one state in that way. The objective not to keep them utterly apart, but a means of bringing them together which would be less troublesome than trying to push them into a federation. I don't think there's any thinking in the Foreign Office about this or any other plans B or C in case a federation doesn't happen, but it would be worth thinking about something. And it was a remarkable Kudret Özesay, who is negotiating now on the federation, has these ideas clearly in the back of his mind.
I think I've read the article you mean, and you remind me, your question reminds me of one of yours that I didn't answer. Federation with a number of units and a number of units where the units themselves are not equal in numerical weight, let's say, sure, is particularly ambitious, is particularly difficult. And like any other federation, irrespective of the number of players, it's only going to work well if the elements of it, however many of them there are, want it to. That seems to me to be absolutely clear. It is, however, the only model that the two parties have over the years been able to agree as potentially delivering what they both need. And so I think I would say two things. One, to go back to the discussion we've already been having about the value of efforts to build trust, exactly so that you do, if you can agree what the model is going to look like, start implementing it with a level of confidence from both that each wants to make it work. The idea that the European Union could be used as a sort of kiln for cooking the Federation over a long period, I think it would risk making the EU's overall business during that period a stage more difficult to conduct. And I think that that is a reason why that sort of, if you like, gradualist model, that sort of vision of creating an arena in which, as the EU does its business, the two Cypriot parties can gradually build up their own shared unit within it. I think on top of all the other institutional challenges that the EU faces, that would be another one which the other members would be probably not very keen to take on.
I think we just have things in mind if the Federation doesn't work. Otherwise we're back to square one. So there has to be a lot of positive thinking.
We've got just time for two more quick questions, and then finally.
Can I take my turn now, because it's directly connected to the...
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Professor Dodds and yourself said that, my name is Alper. You said that federations are ambitious and not possible. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I disagree. First of all, there's one staring you in the face in England and Scotland. I mean, after devolution, it's arguable that there is some kind of federal arrangement. It may split away, but that's a separate point. Secondly, two-state is staring you also in the face across the continent. Belgium is a classic example of a two-state. I don't know whether you watch Salamander. Do you watch Salamander? It's a detective story from Belgium where they have both languages, Flemish and Walloon. It works perfectly, actually. It's got its problems. They couldn't get the government together for 2 years. That's quite true. But they had a government in place. They were, as it were, run. The country was not ungoverned during that time. They couldn't have a political government. So where does Professor Dodds get this idea that the federation doesn't work? It works. It can work. In Cyprus, power sharing did not work. But that's different. What can work in Cyprus, of course, the reason why it's got to be a federal arrangement is actually, and although I'm Turkish Cypriot myself, I must say, it's because the Turkish Cypriots have sort of brought it about. You see what I mean? You can't rely on your own wrongdoing to say, well, it's not going to work. Since they brought it about by moving to one area. Consequently, I don't think...
Have you got a question?
No, I was just disputing the... I was not agreeing with you on... Or Professor Dodds.
I didn't say it couldn't work.
You said it's ambitious. I don't accept it's ambitious.
No. I insist on its being ambitious.
Yes.
I insist on its being ambitious, but I don't say it can't work. I think that the Belgian example shows just how ambitious it is, just how much confidence the elements need to have in each other for it to work smoothly. The fact that it took a year and a half, whatever it was, to form a government was a reflection of the lack of institutional trust between the elements. As you say, the place didn't fall to pieces as a result. That is partly because they have a system of caretaker governments which carried on, partly because of the amount of the country's business which was done at federated level anyway, and partly because, I think, they were able to agree at least that in terms of their performance within the European Union, they would let the caretaker government carry on. But it was ambitious, and it still is ambitious. And we have seen repeatedly over the years how difficult they find it to settle constitutional dilemmas as they come up. It's not to say it can't be done. It is done there. It could be done in Cyprus, but it needs trust and it needs a good deal of effort to keep solving the problems as they come up.
Why in Switzerland works?
Switzerland's got many more. 4 languages, and I don't know how many cantons. 17, is it? A lot, anyway. But and they have it's a confederation. It is hugely decentralised, and the ability of Switzerland to play, how can I put it, a normal part within the family of European or wider nations is very seriously influenced by the processes that they have for public consultation, the referendum processes, the ability of one or a few cantons to hold up progresses. If they didn't have such a successful economy, I'm not sure that we would be holding them up as a successful political example.
Well, it works very well.
But
Another journalist.
Yeah,
we spoke about the beneficial effect of the EU membership in your relationship with Cyprus. Could the EU have a more pressing effect on the negotiations with the Cyprus issue? I mean, does the UK or you think the EU could or should play
the EU
play more, I don't know, not leading but influential active role?
I think there are 2 potential roles. One is in terms of helping the EU's experience of finding solutions to some of the things that will need to be solved to be brought to bear. There are things that the EU has learned in other cases which could be useful potentially in the Cypriot case, or could at least give food for thought to the negotiators in Cyprus. And so one thing that doesn't really happen very well at the moment, but could happen, is to find better ways of bringing that to bear. Not in terms of this is the EU solution, but in terms of here are things that the EU has learned how to do, or models that the EU has developed, or countries within the EU have developed, which might be worth taking into account in the search for solutions. And then there will be specific issues where the EU acquis comes into play, specific problems which the EU rules provide limits on what the possible solutions can be, or will need one way or another to be squared, to be dealt with. We haven't got to that stage yet. When we get to that stage, I think it will be important, it will certainly be helpful to have some means or another to enable that that sensitivity to when you're getting near the limits of what the acquis provides for, to be alerted, to be made known to the process, so that as far as possible, time need not be wasted going off in directions which in the end are going to cause problems in terms of the EU member state, which the reunited Cyprus would be.
Last question, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time.
It's a comment really. I'm John Karalam, I'm another academic without a college to go to. The closest we have as an example is Belgium.
Yes, sorry.
And it's Belgium.
Yes.
all other federations are different. Belgium has a strong federal government, and that's how it operates. They have similar problems to Cyprus, ethnic, linguistic, religious differences, especially linguistic. Financial, economic, one of the states is much more able to create wealth than the other, and they survive because they have a strong federal system. And I think in Cyprus, if we are going to make any progress, we have to create strong federal systems to give a chance to the state to survive. If we do that, I think federation will work beautifully.
But you both have to want.
Yes, of course. I mean, if you're going to be
I'm afraid we've run out of time.
One is very quick.
How quick?
Is the answer quick as well as the question?
Thank you for such an enjoyable lecture that it was delivered indeed with a sense of humility. I agree with you that the factor of trust is the major factor for shaping and implementing any solution, hopefully solution that soon. When you go and visit Famagusta being closed, well, you see it from the outside and how do you feel? What makes you feel? And what is your view of the Famagusta to be used as sort of the return of Famagusta to its rightful inhabitants as a catalyst for the trust and the solution?
What can one feel if you go and look at it and you see a 40-year abandoned city falling down, by now needing probably very extensive starting again from the beginning. It's gone beyond the stage at which people could move back into where they left and resume life in the properties as they were before, in most cases, I guess. We don't know, nobody's been in there, but it seems likely. Could it be a catalyst? Yes, in an ideal world it could be a catalyst, and certainly if it could be handed over or steps towards it could start to happen, I think the positive confidence building effect would be very significant. What I would be anxious about would be a situation, I don't think it's how it is, but it could become that way, where people started to say only if the closed city has been handed back first can anything else happen. That I think is creating a trap. But of course, if it can happen, or if steps towards it can happen, then the effect of that can only be positive.
I actually think that it's going to be more antagonistic rather than confidence building, because that land is actually claimed by Wakaf.
And that's a much bigger story than what we've got time for.
Exactly, so it's going to be more antagonistic rather than confidence building.
Right, I'm sure you'd all like to join me in thanking the High Commissioner once again for stuff.
Thank you.